This episode is brought to you by
Cry Havoc, from New York Times #1 bestselling author Jack Carr. Cry Havoc, a Tom Reese thriller. Order now.
Set against the backdrop of wartime London, Baldacci delivers a story that is both haunting and redemptive. Through the eyes of two teenagers and a grieving bookseller, we see how loss, survival, and unexpected kinship can forge a bond stronger than blood. It's a beautifully written novel about finding light in the darkest hours, a theme that resonates deeply with those who've endured, adapted, and kept going when the world around them fell apart. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this. It is such an honor for me, and I'm just such an admirer of your work, your example, such an inspiration. And I know how busy you are because I did the math on the 52 books, 7 children, young reader books, 4 short stories. That's up to 60 in about just shy of 30 years, which averages to 2 a year. And I didn't start doing the 2 a year till later on, which means that there are 3 a year in a few of these publishing cycles. But first off, I also want to explain to you a little bit about the book club and what this is. And it's really a way for me to encourage people to read, to create new readers. And reading has been it's been foundational to really everything that I've done in my life, from the military to now as an author. And so it's just a way for me to encourage people to read and maybe introduce people who aren't readers back to reading amazing authors like you. So so that's the kind of the reason for the podcast. And this was amazing. I rarely use the word brilliant. This is a brilliant book that is also beautifully written. And I want to get to that a little bit. There's one sentence in here in particular that's really stood out to me. But so well written. Can't tell you how much I enjoyed this. But I would like to go ask you a couple questions about your publishing journey. And I know I'm not going to get to all this, and I have my eye on the clock because with 3 books a year at times, I know how busy you must be. But I want to ask you a little bit about this publishing journey, because in the new preface to Absolute Power that was published in 1996, you talk a little bit about that. And you were an attorney, but you had a film agent in LA because you were working on some screenplays, I believe. But you talk about it here, how you get this call, and you were very hopeful about this screenplay that you'd written. It had some traction in Hollywood. And then you get this call that's a bit of a setback, and you have a decision to make. And I wanted to start off by asking you about that.
Yeah, I had practiced most of my career in Washington, D.C. as a litigator at a medium-sized firm. Then we were sort of gobbled up by this large national firm, and I was assigned to go work on this case in Islip, New York, and Long Island. And I flew up there with another team of lawyers. And I had this screenplay out in L.A. It was called Reverse Order. It was sort of like Die Hard in the White House, 20 years before they made all those Die Hard in the White House movies.
Right.
And it was good traction, good coverage for all the studios and my agent back then. No cell phones back then, so we were just using regular phones back and forth. And I was working on this case. The case was boring as hell, and I just didn't want to be there. And I was hoping this could be my big break. And I got a call around midnight my time from LA that Warner Brothers had passed on it. And because it's sort of a herd mentality out there, when they passed on it, everybody else thought there was something wrong with the script, so they passed. And he said, "I'm really sorry, it just didn't work." So I remember looking out the window of my hotel room in Islip, thinking, maybe that it's not going to happen for me. I'd been writing since I was a kid, and never really had gotten a break, never had really sold anything, and maybe the magic was going to happen, and I could just be a lawyer. But I went back home to D.C. and I thought, I've never tried a novel. Let me give that a shot. And then my law office was near the White House. And back then, I guess Clinton was president back then, or maybe H.W. right at the very end. And then I had an idea because I was a student of history. I had read a lot about JFK and all the trysts that he had. So I thought, what if, the president did something to someone during one of these trysts and she died and the good guys became the bad guys and the only good guy who had moral fiber in the story was a burglar who saw all of this. I thought I could make something out of that. That sounds interesting. I haven't really read that story before. So I spent 3 years while I was practicing writing that novel, enjoyed every minute of it. And then, that book really changed my life. But I think the reason I didn't decide to just say the hell with it and give it up is because I really couldn't. I mean, people ask, why do you write? And I said, well, I can't not write. That's why I write. It's just compulsion that's even beyond an obsession. So that really was my publishing journey. A lot of writers, we all go through a lot of this tribulations and rejections. It's all part of the gauntlet you have to go through. And at the end of the day, if you're still standing and you have a book published, I think you were meant to be a writer.
Yep, exactly. I remember the story, John Grisham, when he couldn't give his first book, A Time to Kill away, and he could have just stopped writing then, but he writes another one, The Firm, which of course then takes off, and we get the movie and all that stuff, and that's a few years before Absolute Power comes out. But I remember that story when I started writing, and so I always knew I was going to write two. And if the first one didn't work out, I was going to do that second one because of that John Grisham story. And if that one didn't work out, then maybe I was going to reevaluate some life choices. But I've always been a writer as well, and a reader, more importantly, from my earliest days. My mom was a librarian, so I grew up surrounded by books and a love of reading, and it's really been foundational to all else. And I did read that heard you say that you were writing short stories in law school, I believe, and trying to sell them to Playboy. And I was curious if you ever sold any.
No, I mean, back then, Playboy published people, like John Updike and Joyce
Yeah.
Carol Oates and Toni Morrison, a lot of great short fiction. And I had no chance in hell ever being published by Playboy. But I also submitted to Atlantic, Story Magazine when that was a thing. And there aren't a lot of outlets anymore for short stories. But I just, short stories were great to start out with because even though they're short, they have every other element that long form fiction has. You have to have characters and dialogue and plot and narrative and all that stuff. But unlike a 400-page novel where sometimes a writer can cruise a little bit and fudge a little bit and hide a few mistakes and weaknesses, there's no place to hide in a short story. And that's why it's such great training ground for longer form fiction because you really have to hone your skills and then extrapolate that out to a 400-page novel. But I loved writing short stories. I loved reading short stories when I was growing up. And also, it's a really fragile start to any writer's career. And looking at the first thing you're going to write is a 400-page novel, that's pretty daunting. How about a 6-page short story? That's more doable. And that's how I sort of looked at it. And that's the route that I took. But yeah, I still have all the rejection letters back from some of them were very polite, some of them were nasty, but that's just the way it goes, right?
No kidding. And then you have to go through this process, and I would guess a few times because you have those short stories, and then you have this screenplay, which you had a film agent for, and then you get, I think, a different agent for Absolute Power, and you send out, I believe it was 7 or 8 different query letters, and I love how you framed it. You talk about it in the preface here to this new edition of Absolute Power, but how you get that agent and then how things take off from there. But can you talk a little bit about that process, what it was like back then to find those agents?
I knew that I needed an agent back then. Things have changed a little bit, but back then I wanted an agent not just to represent me, but also to provide good counsel along the way, advice. I mean, people that knew the industry far better than I did. So I drafted a very short query letter, and I knew that the manuscript itself was going to carry the day. And back then I just printed up, 7 copies of the manuscript and I sent the whole book up. Now people send sample chapters. I didn't know any better. But the query letter was very short. It just said, I'm David Baldacci. I'm a lawyer in Washington, D.C. This book is about the president, a burglar, a murder, and a cover-up. And I guarantee if you read the first page, you won't stop until you read the last. And I did that because, one, I felt like I needed to show confidence in my material. But two, I figured half of them would read it just to prove me wrong, so they could write me back and say, no, by the way, you suck. But that was just the way that I handled it. And the way I got the names of agents, whenever I heard about a first-time novelist who hit it really big, I'd go to the bookstore, look in the acknowledgement section of their books, because they always thank their agents. And that way I got a list of agents who, one, took first-time novelists, not all agencies do. And secondly, those novelists had the wherewithal to shepherd a first-time debut novelist through this gauntlet of the publishing process. So I thought that would be a pretty good route. And I sent the query letters off, told them it was, multiple submissions, so there was more than one agent. And I was waiting. I heard back from six of the seven who wanted to be my agent after reading the book. I met the seventh guy years later. Very nice guy, wonderful agency. And he came up and he said, introduced himself, congratulated me. He said, "You're the biggest mistake I've ever made in my entire career." And I said, "Well, no, you know what? I'm not, because obviously you did not connect with the material and you probably couldn't have been a good agent for it. And you probably made a good decision not to represent me on that novel." He said, thanks for making me try to feel better, but it was still the biggest mistake. But I have to tell you, here's what my agent that I've had my entire career, Aaron Priest, when I went to visit him, he was like fifth on the list. And I went into the office and we sat down. And he said, "Look, anybody can sell this book. You don't need me to sell this book. You can probably go and sell this book yourself. But I want to know, do you have other books that you want to write? Because I don't represent books, I represent careers." And I said, "I have a lot of books that I want to write." And he said, "Then you belong here and we'll have a good ride." And he's the only one who ever said that to me. Everybody else was just focused on the book, absolute power. And that was it. But he had a longer range goal in mind. And quite frankly, so did I. So it really meshed together. And I came out of that office thinking, "Yeah, I've got two more interviews, but he's the guy. He's the guy."
Wow, that's amazing. I had a similar experience where my publisher, because I didn't know I needed an agent. You at least knew you needed one. I didn't know I needed one. And so I sent it right. I went to the acknowledgments of books that I was reading, thrillers in the political thriller space, and saw Emily Bestler being thanked by many of them. And so I thought, okay, this is the person who's going to publish my book. But I had no connections to publishing or anything like that. But I knew I would just get it to her. And that's ended up being what happened. And then she said, "You need an agent." We met for coffee in New York, and she said, "I love it, but you need an agent." And I said, "Oh, how do I get one of those?" And so she introduced me to four, and I picked one who's still my agent today, who's fantastic. And I love the part you write about it in here about getting the agent, the book selling, and you talking to your wife about it, and she says something along the lines of, "How much is this going to cost us?"
Yeah. When I called her from the office, I was at the office when I got the phone call. And I thought I was being punked because my agent called up and said, "Hey, if this book sells for a lot of money, will you stop writing?" And I said, "Well, yeah, that's a dream. Sure, that'd be great." Then he told me it sold for a lot of money. And I just thought, "Oh, great, I've got an agent. He turns out to be an alcoholic or something." I just thought he was delusional. That stuff doesn't happen to people, right? And then I get a call from the head of, the chief CEO of Time Warner. I thought, well, this is either the most elaborate prank in the world or else it's true. And then I called my wife, and we had one child at the time. And I said, "Honey, I've got great news. The book's going to get published." And she said, "That's wonderful." And she really did say, "How much is it going to cost?" Because she thought we were sort of self-publishing. I said, "No, the really cool thing is we're actually going to get paid for this novel after all these years." So it was a surreal moment. It was, people I didn't even know and never even knew existed were like chucking checks at me as fast as they could from all over the world, and film rights and foreign rights and everything else. But what I told myself, Jack, was that throughout this entire thing, slow down, because this is the only time this is going to happen to you for the first time. And just enjoy it. It's been a long road. You're lucky as hell because there are a lot of great writers out there who never got the break that you got. And we have never read any of their work not because they're not good, they are good, but because they haven't fallen into that perfect time, that spot where somebody could relate to the material, found it, discovered it, and could do something with it. And I was on the outside of the glass looking in for a long time. I relate to and understand very well that feeling. So I try as much as I can over the course of my career to help aspiring writers and debut writers and struggling writers as much as I can, because at the end of the day, you and I, we're not going to write forever. At some point, this is going to be it for us. But the world's always going to need new voices, and they need new voices from all across the spectrum. And that's what's the most important thing about carrying on the written word, because, with all the talk of AI, writing books, and all this other stuff going on, it's just we need to make sure that humanity, true humanity, remains within people who create books and other works of art.
I love how you frame that in the preface right here. And I was reading that people did give me that advice as my book was optioned, and then it started going through that process, and then it got picked up by a streamer, and then we're filming it, and then I have a cameo, and then I'm editing all the scripts, and I'm learning this process, and people kept telling me slow down and enjoy it. And I don't know if I did. I tried to, but I also am just at a full-on sprint. And I realized things are moving so fast. And from being on the battlefield in Iraq and Afghanistan, what you're doing there is you're trying to figure out how to capitalize on momentum, how to look for gaps in the enemy's defenses, how to adapt to an ever-changing environment, adapt to an enemy that's adapting to you. And that, I think, it just became a part of me over those 20 years, 10 of which were really at war. And I think I transferred that over a little bit to the publishing process and to everything that's happened since. So I don't know if it was possible for me to slow down any more than I did, but at least I gave that, at least I tried. And yeah, that's just kind of how it goes. I feel extremely fortunate. And so for people that don't know, the book's published in 96 and the movie follows in 97, which is fairly quick for this process. And I wanted to ask you about that experience and what it was like while it was happening. What was your involvement with the film and how you framed it?
Yeah, so William Goldman was hired by Castle Rock optioned the film, and William Goldman was hired by him. He's a legendary screenwriter. He's now since passed, but two-time Academy Award winner. And he came down to Virginia, where I lived, and we spent the day together, drove around looking at some locations. We talked nonstop, hours and hours about writing, about the story, about his career. My career was just starting, and he was a fascinating guy. And then he had written a couple of drafts of the script without any star attached to it. And then he called me up one day and he said, this is Bill. He was so dramatic. He said, I've got incredible news for you and I have abysmal news for you. And I said, okay, give me the incredible news first. He said, legendary screen actor Clint Eastwood assigned to star, direct, and produce your movie. It's been green-lighted. The film's going to get made. I was like, Clint Eastwood, oh my God. I think I called everybody I'd never known in my whole life after that one. And then I said, what's the abysmal news? And he goes, the abysmal news is legendary filmmaker Clint Eastwood has just signed to star, direct, and produce your movie. A lot of your book is going to be gone because Clint wants to be the hero. And his character in the novel dies halfway through. And back then, Clint did not die in any of his films. I think the only time he came close was like High Plains Drifter, where he was killed, but he came back to the coast and killed everybody. you know? So that was Clint back then. So Bill's job, and it was a tough job, was to figure out a way to keep him alive. So he had to change the second and third acts completely. And he called me up late one night. I think he'd been drinking. And I remember this until my last moment on earth. He said, I can't figure out how to keep the son of a bitch alive. He said, you want to have a shot at it? And I said, Bill, I spent 3 years of my life writing that book, figuring out how to kill him. No, I really don't want to have a shot at it. So they brought in another screenwriter to do a polish on it. And that's how the book came out. The movie came out. I was an executive producer, but just a name only. Didn't spend a lot. I read drafts of the scripts. I went to some of the filming. I went to some of the premieres. And I do have to say that at one of the premieres, a guy came over to me in a very aggressive manner. And he said, can I ask you a question? And I said, yeah. And I noticed that, he had a little tan line here. So he'd worn an ear mic and had a little bump under the chest. And he said, where do you get off having Clint Eastwood kill a Secret Service agent? And I was like, that's not in the book. That was a scene they added in the movie. And this guy was like mad. And then he got a little bit closer and he said, you're a book, you're a movie. And then luckily his wife or girlfriend came over and said, John, he's telling the truth. That's not in the book. I read the book. And then I was a little upset. So I said, you know what? I have Clint Eastwood's number here. So here, you can call Clint and you can ask him. And so the guy looks at the card. There was nothing on the card. I was just bluffing. And he goes, no, man, that's okay. That's okay. Clint intimidated everybody.
Yeah.
So that was some of the experience with the film.
Wow. Yeah, I think for me, it was realizing at the outset that this is going to change. And that's okay. I have something that's pure, that's the book, that's the best that I could do at the time. And now this is going to get handed off to a team of writers, to a writer's room. And that means things are going to change because you're telling the story through a different medium. And there are time limits, there are location limits, there are budgets, there are all sorts of factors there. There's a team that includes creatives and also all the way up to executives and then all the way back down that are going to give notes. And there's going to be all sorts of factors there. But I realized that going in. So I wanted to enjoy that experience and not get not get upset when things changed. First Blood, the book, very different than First Blood, the movie, of course.
Yeah. Well, I've adapted one of my own books for feature film, and I had to take a 400-page novel and turn it into, a 107-page screenplay. And then that's why I relate to, I have like 7 different projects now in development. Let's hope some of them get through for, TV or movie, but But all the screenwriters that are attached to them, I get along with them really well just because I understand what they're trying to do. I've had to do it myself, and you have to ask yourself, what's the core of the story that I can tell if it's a movie in a couple of hours or less, or if it's a limited series and what I can do in 10 or 12 episodes. And then that's a very different decision than, what can I put into a 400-page novel? But at the end of the day, before I sign the deal, if they already have a writer attached, I always demand or request to sit down with the writer so we can go through stuff. What's your vision for the story? How do you see the characters? And if it turns out their vision is close enough to mine, then I'll go ahead and sign the deal. But quite frankly, being a former lawyer, I can tell you, it doesn't matter what you put into the contract. The contract is only good as your wherewithal to sue in court. And if you want to spend 10 years of your life in litigation with Warner Brothers, God bless you, but that's not really on my bucket list.
Yeah.
So you just need to understand what you're getting into.
Exactly, exactly. And I think after the book came out or movie came out, you keep practicing law for about a year before
Yeah.
you turn to writing full time. And was that just to have that backup there, a contingency plan, or to see some cases through, or?
There's a little bit of both, but really, I was thinking to myself that if, I had no idea if Absolute Power was going to be successful. And if it wasn't, that was going to be my shot. That was it. Nobody was going to buy anything else from me because the publisher had spent a lot of money, promoted it widely, and if it flopped, then I was dead in the water. And I'd had a really great career as a lawyer. I did a lot of terrific cases. Argued cases in state, federal court all over the country. I really enjoyed that. I made a good living and supported the family. It was not my first choice of career, obviously. So I always sort of hedge my bets on a little bit on the conservative side when it comes to, don't just, you can't be a starving artist. You have a family. So I wanted to sort of see how the book was going to go. And at the end, right before I left on tour for Absolute Power, I remember talking to one of my partners and saying, you know what, I can't do both of these careers for full time. And I think I'm going to have to, hang up my shingle. And I remember one of my partners said, look, if it had been me, the day I signed the contract, I would have faxed in my resignation. So thanks for staying a year.
Yep. Oh, I get it. Since 2003, Bravo Company Manufacturing, founded by a U.S. Marine veteran in Heartland, Wisconsin, has been crafting mission-ready weapon components for professionals who demand reliability. Trusted by U.S. Special Operations, law enforcement, and responsible citizens worldwide, BCM gear is engineered and tested to perform in the most unforgiving environments. Every BCM tool is built and tested as if your life depends on it. Go to Bravo Company USA for more information. Bravo Company, American made, duty built. And I've also heard, so you have surprised your publisher a few times with a book they didn't know was coming. They didn't know you were working on. So a third book, just randomly, not randomly to them, not randomly to you. So that's my goal, is to get there one day, to surprise my publisher with a book like that. Because I have so many ideas, I'll never get to all of them. I'm gonna do the best I can. But when you drop a book like that that's a surprise, you've done it a few times. Have they turned them around fairly quickly and put them in, or do you have to wait because you already have others in the pipeline? Or what's the fastest turnaround you've ever got on either a book or a surprise third novel?
Usually what will happen, because the last 15 or 16 years, I published in April and November. So they've been pretty quick about turning around, third book surprises. And usually what they'll do is they'll decide to drop it into the summer, which is really the only slot left. So it'll come out in June or July. I'm a big crime noir fan. And Ross McDonald is one of there's the trump of it. There's a Raymond Chandler who did it incredibly well. The guy who wrote the Maltese Falcon, who did it incredibly well, and Raymond Chandler improved upon him, and Ross McDonald improved upon Raymond Chandler. And so I decided, just out of the blue, that I wanted to write about a guy named Aloysius Archer, who was in the 1940s. He was in the army, then he was in prison, and then he wanted to become a PI. And I wrote the first one, One Good Deed, just because I loved that time period. I loved the fact that the country, had been at war for many years, and everybody wanted it to move on and get the good times rolling again. But it wasn't good for everybody. So here's a guy rolling out in 1949, and I just was fixated on that. And I wrote that book fairly quickly. The 620 Man was a surprise book.
Oh,
I
wow.
was riding my bike one time. I'd read two papers, the Panama Papers and the Pandora Papers by this international consortium of journalists. So I've gotten to know the leaders of that organization really well. They take on global stories that no one newspaper can take on. So they had broken these stories about $30 trillion of dark money floating around the world outside the purview of tax havens, authorities, anything really. And it fascinated me. So I wrote The 620 Man in 2 months just because the story just unspooled so quickly in my mind. Because I wanted to, and sometimes I'll write a book to answer a question I don't think has been answered. And in the Pandora and Panama Papers, they identified the people, they identified the fact of all this money, but the way they didn't answer was, what the hell do you do with $30 trillion? So my answer in the 620 Man, I wouldn't go out and buy the ninth yacht or the 10th jet. I would try to manipulate the world so that the playing field is even more in my favor. And that's how I wrote that book. And I remember the guys behind the international consortium, one of them was reading the 620 Man. I mentioned them in the book, and the guy like fell out of the bed. He was like, "Oh my God, I can't believe you mentioned." And he flew to DC, and we had dinner. I was just in Australia, and I met with him and his wife in Australia, and he said, "You're spot on. That's what that money is being used for." That's why, school board elections, now you have to raise $6 million for a local school board election. So sometimes it's like that. And I have never tried to limit myself about, when people call me a thriller writer, mystery writer, I said, I'm just a storyteller. So don't, genre, and put me in a genre box, because that's sort of a disservice to writers. We can write about anything we want to write about. I write about things. I love to write about things that I don't know much about, but I want to know a lot about. And then that added passion and interest and fascination every day is a new discovery. You got to fill up your creative box, because if your creative tank runs out of gas halfway through the project, man, you're dead in the water. And who wants to be there?
Yeah. And talking about films for a second, films, and it kind of relates to some other things I wanted to ask you about, but they're passive in nature. They can be very powerful and evoke powerful emotions. But the act of reading is different, because you're putting in the effort. And which is also, when it comes to adaptations, a little tricky if you're personally involved with the process of making the film or television series, because everyone who reads it has a little, no matter how you describe it, a bit of a different idea of how someone should look, or a room, or whatever it might be that you're describing. And it's not exactly what they imagined they're seeing on the screen. And so some people get upset. Now they can let you know. They don't have to find your publisher's address like in 1996 and write a letter and put a stamp on it and hope it gets there, and then hope it works its way through some assistants and ends up on your editor's desk. No, they can just write on social media, tell you how much they hated it because the color of the dress was wrong, or whatever it might be, whatever they take issue with. But it's interesting how different it is to sit there and experience someone else's vision, rather than have that partnership essentially with an author who you trust with time you're never going to get back, and then you get to be an active participant essentially in that story. So that's, I don't know if you think of movies and television and books in a similar way or not.
I absolutely do. I mean, you're absolutely right about, you sitting and watching a movie. You're getting a director's vision for what a story is meant to be, and the actor's portrayal of that story. And within the vision of the director, you have to be a full-fledged participant in reading a novel, and you bring a part of your soul and intellect and interest to it, and you interpret it very differently from other people. I always like to say that a book is never truly finished until the last reader reads it, because they're going to come away with totally different views about what the story is supposed to represent. And that's the good thing about it. You know why? Because as you're reading a book, you're growing as a person too. And that's why books are so important. Look, I'm a lot older than you. I grew up in the tail end of Jim Crow in the old capital of the Confederacy. I grew up into a world that was totally and completely segregated. And I grew up surrounded by racists and racism. And I could have turned out very differently. Mark Twain used to say that travel is fatal to prejudice. He traveled around the world during his lifetime. I had no chance to travel outside of Richmond, Virginia when I was a kid, but my parents took my brother and sister and I to the library every day, and I like to think that we traveled the world without a plane ticket or a passport. And when you meet people on the pages who don't look like you, pray like you, think like you, speak like you instantly recognize that sheer core of humanity. And I think the greatest attribute that books teach you is also the greatest human attribute, and that's empathy. Why? Because empathy leads to all the best in humanity, and the lack of empathy leads to all the worst in humanity. So, I've supported books and reading in libraries and literacy my entire career because I know the more readers we have, the better world we're going to have.
Exactly, which is why I try to remain hopeful about the future. But then I also realize that older readers are dying off. And the younger generation obviously has a lot more to contend with when it comes to different entertainment or vying for your attention. And you don't have to go somewhere for that. You don't have to go to a video arcade, or you don't have to walk over to a video game in your house. You don't have to do any of those things. It's coming right to you through this device that you carry around that's meant to essentially keep you from reading, and also meant to manipulate you, your thoughts and behaviors. And that's another thing that is different when it comes to reading. As an active participant in it, as a reader, you're putting in that effort. You have some sweat equity in this. And here, you're not putting any of that in. You're being manipulated essentially by an algorithm. And which is why it's so. I'm going analog. As soon as I can go back to an actual landline, I'm going to have a landline, so I'm not available all the time. And this will become a thing for me of the past, so I can get back to the things I love to do, which is read. But I try to remain hopeful for the future, but it is very difficult when you look at readership.
The stats are terrible. They're exact opposite of where they should be. And people today tell me my kids are old enough so where they didn't really have to suffer through the social media when they were in school. Thank God for that. But I know a lot of parents who do, and their kids feel isolated. They're anxious. They're nervous. They can't really connect. And this is the reason why they can't connect, and they're anxious because they go on here and they're looking at impossible standards of everything, of beauty, performance, wealth. It's like if you're not a millionaire by the time you're 14 and you don't have your own channel on YouTube, what's wrong with you, right? It's absurd. The thing is, all the issues, particularly young people are dealing with, one way for them to solve them, almost all of them, is to pick up a book. Because it's like the chief anxiety reliever of all time. Because then you get to pour in and spend time with people who may share a lot of the same things you're going through, the same challenges, and then you can find out resolutions and ideas, and it makes you think about more important things, not living up to someone else's standard, to creating your own. I'm really, really hoping that the pendulum at some point is going to swing back, because quite frankly, I do not see this where we're going now as sustainable on multiple levels. And I was just at Barnes & Noble, just opened a brand new store near my home, and I went and did the ribbon cutting, and there were tons of people who came in. It's a beautiful store. And there were a lot of young people who came in, which was really heartening. Some of them even came up and got books signed by me, but I looked around at them, and they're like this, I'm in Northern Virginia. It's a very affluent area. Everybody's got 3 PhDs. So I'm often preaching to the choir up here. I get it. But I have deep ties to Appalachia because that's where my mom's family is from. And that's a very different world out there. And we need to bridge these different worlds together and bring the opportunities that books bring to everyone. I'm just hoping that the pendulum at some point is going to swing back, but it's not going to swing back by itself. People like you, people like me, other people similarly situated, we've got to work our butts off, try to make this happen. It's just, there's too much at stake for just to sit idly by and do nothing.
Exactly right. Barnes & Noble just opened a new bookstore here. We have our local bookstore, Dolly's, down here, which is fantastic. But there's another area closer to the road here where Barnes & Noble opened one. And I got to do the ribbon cutting as well. It's my first ribbon cutting, and then signed some books and all that. And they did a really good job with it.
No, I mean, I think every time a bookstore opens, whether it's an independent or a chain or whatever, it's like, angels getting its wings.
Yeah, exactly.
It's magic.
Exactly. One of my favorite films.
All right, this is Jack Carr checking in from Park City, Utah. Hello, everybody out there at SIG Next. I wish I could be there with you. I was just finishing up my latest novel, Cry Havoc, which hits shelves on October 7th. And last year at SIG Next, I was so honored to be able to introduce the 40th anniversary edition of the P226 right here. And if you followed me for more than a day, then you know how fond I am of this pistol. I used it for my entire 20 years in the SEAL teams. It was by my side on every single deployment. Even when I had to put my M4 down, I always had my 226 Mark 25 variant sometimes right there at the ready. And this year, I am also honored once again to be able to introduce the next evolution of the P226, and that is this pistol right here. It is the P226X Legion. Oh, that feels good. Dare I say it might feel better than the original.
It comes in both a full-size edition with a 4.4-inch barrel and a carry-size edition with a 3.8-inch barrel. Both sizes are available in double action, single action with the iconic P226 decocking lever. The new P226X Legion has a new X-Series alloy frame with an even more ergonomic design with a deep undercut below the trigger guard and an extended beaver tail with an enhanced grip angle for an even more balanced feel in your hand. Both sizes have a full-length dust cover and rail on the front for a classic modern look. One of the biggest additions to the new P226X Legion is the amazing trigger, which is now adjustable in all models, giving you a smooth, crisp, customizable feel. Both the full and carry size have the bull barrels, just like the legendary X5 editions, making them extremely accurate. All models are optics ready with a removable sight plate, which has a pro footprint. These two are fitted with SIG's Romeo X optics. The all-new P226X Legion series, the next chapter in the history of this incredible pistol.
This pistol feels good. Still feels like it's an extension of my hand. And this right here, kapoo. This just might end up being the new carry. Yeah, I could do some good work with this. Love it.
But I also want to say audiobooks. I'm a physical book reader. I had never been an audiobook book person for whatever reading. I like the physical experience of being in these pages. But this one, because we were taking our son to camp in Wyoming, so we had a little drive here from Park City, Utah. So on the way there and back, my wife and I listened to probably got through the first half, maybe not quite half, but almost half, of Strangers in Time on audio. It was incredible. And it was almost an audio drama. I don't think it's categorized as that, but with different voices, and it was incredible. How did that come about? And did you have a hand in that? Did you direct it towards? Because it really brought you back to 1944 as well.
It did, and we started this a number of books ago. Where I probably my last 25 books, we've had at least 2 readers on every one. I was so sick of guys trying to sound like women and women trying to sound like guys. You're not paying them enough money that you can afford somebody else to come in and do this, okay? So we started to do that a long time ago. And then with some of the recent thrillers, we started to add like a third cast member. And then with The Calamity of Souls, which was my legal drama set in 1968, I said, look, this is a really important book for me. This is part of my life. So we're going to go multicast with this, and we're going to make it, like you said, a dramatic performance. We're not going to make this is not reading it. They're living the book. That's what I want. So they sent a casting call out, and I looked at dozens and dozens and dozens, listened to audio files, and some of them were very close. It was just a smidgen of difference between why one reader got picked over another. We brought together these multicasts. I think it was six of them in Calamity, and I think 6 or 7 in Strangers. And I said, I want the audio to bring out everything that I can't do with words. As good of a writer as I can be, I can't bring the drama that the sound of a human voice, either under duress or happy or sad, I can't do that, with words at the same level. And I want it to be a different experience. So when I probably listened to 60 different actors for the 6 Strangers in Time audio files. And I picked the cast that we picked, my wife and I did. And we just wanted we wanted them to set the people in 1944 in London in the middle of a world war. And then we wanted the humanity of the story to take off from there. And I wanted listeners to be able to relate to everything that was going on. And I think this is the wave of the future. I mean, there's no reason in the world why we can't have multiple cast members for every audiobook. If publishers really think this is important and a lot of people are doing it, guess what? If you make it even better, even more people will listen to them. So why don't we do that?
Well, it certainly worked here, and it was. And a lot of people tell me that they also do that. They do the audiobook and they buy the physical copy because they're in their car and they get home and they don't want to sit in their driveway or in their garage and keep listening to it. They need to go in and juggle the kids and make dinner or whatever else they're going to do. But then they want to get back to it. They don't want to go back to the garage. They want to sit there in front of the fire and have a whiskey or a tea or whatever, and sit there with a physical copy. And then they go back to the car in the morning and continue on. And I've heard that from a lot of people, and that's what I ended up doing with this. First half I did the audio, and the second half I did reading, and it's so good. Like I said, just brilliant, so beautifully written. And specifically to this, I know you really enjoy traveling to England. You've been there multiple times. But what inspired this book? It's been in the works for a long time, and I believe you wrote it out longhand. Is that right?
Yeah, I wrote the first 150 pages of the novel longhand. My wife gave me a blank page. She made a journal for Calamity on Christmas, and I wrote A Calamity of Souls on Christmas Day, I think in 2012, and that was the title that remained, and started to write that novel. I did the same thing with Strangers of Time. It was a different title back then, but I thought of Strangers of Time sort of late in the process. But I think better in cursive. I mean, I normally have to compose on a laptop just because of, deadlines and everything else, but I edit longhand. That's the first editorial that I do. Once I print everything out, the draft is done, and I like to pull out the pens and murder the pages in longhand because I just think better in cursive. Is that buffer between the keys that it's part typist and part writer. I don't like that buffer, but just with the pen, there's no buffer at all, and I think better that way. And I've been an Anglophile for a long time. Growing up, I cut my teeth on a lot of British writers, from Agatha Christie to H.G. Wells to Conan Doyle, and to Charles Dickens, and just a whole cadre of writers that really impacted me as a young reader. I also, the Brits for me are a nation that they've been under siege and at war for centuries. They have a totally different experience from what we have in this country, and they have far fewer resources, but somehow they make do, and somehow they get even better results at times. And that's always fascinated me. My father and his 5 brothers fought in World War II. My dad was in the Navy, and he would tell me stories. He was 17 years old on a destroyer escorting cargo ships across the North Atlantic, in the middle of winter. And he would be on watch from 10 at night until 2 in the morning, and they would chain the sailors to the deck so they wouldn't be washed over. And he said, one moment I'd be 30 feet up above the North Atlantic, and then the bow would come down, and I have 30-foot tall walls of water on either side of me. And he would get over, he got over to England. He went to London while the ships were getting prepared to come back across the North Atlantic. So he told me about his stories there. But here's really, I think, the reason I wrote Strangers of Time and wanted it to come out around this time is that, for me, World War II is a timeless, classic experiment of human experience. You have good versus evil and every human and personal experience in between across the spectrum. You'd be hard pressed to try to figure out a scenario that did not occur during that time period that human beings can suffer through. And it shows that, one, we've been through really challenging times, dark times, and when everybody thought there was no hope at all, and we made it through. Secondly, particularly these days when so many people feel isolated, particularly young men, I wanted to show that if you're going to have to go through bad times, it's far better if you can go through those times with people who care about you and then you care about them. Because suffering is bad. Suffering alone is even worse. So going through something like that, just a cataclysmic experience, it's a lot better if you have somebody that loves you and you love them, and you can support them and they can support you. I think those are really important themes in the human experience, and World War II illustrated all of them. If you imagine, you're getting bombed every night, and yet you get up the next day and you go to work, you feed your kids, life goes on, even in the most, horrific circumstances. Like you're a combat veteran, you fought in wars, those things happen, unfortunately. But it's not like all life stops. People figure out a way to get through it. I just wanted this book to sort of represent the resiliency of the human spirit in really dark times.
I wonder if did you start with that theme? Because I've either read or heard you talk about having a theme, and I did this as well. And I got it from Stephen Pressfield, who was in an interview, and he talked about a playwright who did something similar, and they would write. I took it as they wrote a word down that would guide the writing process. When I go back and listen to it now, it's a sentence or two. But anyway, I started with, for my first novel, Revenge, and then I added Revenge Without Constraint. And every single one of those, I've had a yellow sticky that guides the writing process with either a few words or a sentence or possibly two that guides me. And if I keep coming back to that theme, it keeps me on track, whether it's directly or, more importantly, probably indirectly. But I think you do something similar, and I wonder, have you done that from the beginning? Where did you get that, or did you come up with it? Because I think you started doing it before Stephen Pressfield ever mentioned it. And then the theme for this book, what was the theme? And I can guess too. Maybe hold off on that one, and I'll guess and see if it's close. But where did you when did you start doing that theme to guide the writing process?
Yeah, I think probably, maybe our fourth or fifth book, because I'm a boater, so I sort of call it my dead reckoning theme. If you have no other navigational process, you can at least use dead reckoning to try to get to the point you want to get to. And themes can be varied, and it's really hard to distill, down to one sentence or a couple of words, a journey that's going to take 450 pages of motivation and enthusiasm and plotting. But if you have sort of a central theme, then, and an enormous number of subplots can play off of that and still be true to the theme that you envisioned. I think the important thing is to understand the sort of story that you want to tell, and then do your best to tell that story. With the understanding that in writing a novel, you have to allow yourself some latitude and flexibility because things change. As you talked about when you were in fighting, and you have to adapt to the conditions on the ground. And when you're writing a novel, you have to adapt to the conditions that you sort of impose on a novel. And you may have thought of something, if you're an outliner, you may have thought of something on the 10th day of writing that you never envisioned might have happened during an outline. And then you can't just say, well, I need to stick to the outline. No, you need to be true to the story you want to tell. So that's how I sort of go. I'm not a big outliner. I try to let the story grow organically. But, having a theme in mind that sort of allows you to, you're at point A and you want to get to point B, and by the most direct route possible, it's nice to sort of have that while you're shooting for it too. So I've done that for a long time, and it served me well. Yeah. I meander a lot of times in my plots and stuff just because I like to turn left when I'm supposed to turn right, because I like to see what might happen if I went the wrong way. But guess what? There's absolutely nothing wrong with that.
I love it. I absolutely love that. And so for here, as I was reading this, I thought it's humanity and hope is what came to mind, and I didn't know if that was either a theme you were thinking of, or maybe something that you hope people would take away from it, or...
Absolutely right. I mean, so much of what debilitates us as a society now is that we seem to focus on the negative all the time, and it's not just us. It's the way society is structured. If you're an online person, then you know that the negative stuff gets the most clickbaits, and you'll make more money off of whatever revenue streams you have tied to your social media account. That's great for you. It sucks for the rest of us, quite frankly. And we live in anxious times, but people have lived in anxious times for thousands of years as well. It's all about how you handle it. And we've, unfortunately, and you pointed this out in some of your remarks already, the society we've organized around ourselves to this day seems to highlight the negative above all else. But the hope for me is that we have a choice to not make that so, that we can go in the opposite direction and really all of a sudden collectively support the more optimistic and hopeful aspects of our lives. Things have changed a lot we have problems and challenges. We all do. We always have. But people are living longer. People are, eating healthier. For the most part, opportunities are greater. They could be a lot greater for a lot more people. And don't get me started on the economics of this. I don't want to go down that road. But if you only focus on the negatives, bad things are going to happen, not just for you, but for everyone else around you. I tell people that as a parent, you're only as happy as your least happiest child. And that's just the way the world works. So if everybody out there is negative, guess what? It's going to pull down everyone. But if there's positivity, it really is a strong force, and it spreads quickly in a really good way. Unlike a virus, it spreads quickly in a really, really positive way.
Yeah, well, you captured that hope and humanity in here in a beautiful way. And that sentence I was talking about earlier, and this isn't the full sentence, this is just the last part of it. You write, and it's not going to sound that hopeful when I read it, but the calamitous burden of existence, you wrote. Do you remember writing that?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And I think I had Calamity of Souls in mind when I was writing that. Just a quick story on when a Calamity of Souls was the title of the book, obviously. And I sent it, and that Calamity was a book the publisher didn't know I was writing. I just wrote Calamity, I didn't even have a contract for it. That's a book I wrote, and I wanted to write it. When I sent it up to my publisher, they loved the book, but they just like, they told me these words and no writer wants to hear. we focus grouped the title and nobody understands it. And so we got some great titles. I was on one of those Zoom meetings. It's you and like 20 people. We have a great title, so don't worry about it. We got this covered. Trust us. I said, okay, what's the title? They said, well, it's The Trial. I said, seriously, The Trial. So I went on Amazon and Barnes & Noble.
How many of those are there?
Like 487. So, and I put in a Calamity of Souls, 0. And I said, no, we're going to have a Calamity of Souls. So the book came out, hit number. I mean, it was a great bet. They're super pleased with how it did. And they came back to me and they're like, yeah, man, Calamity of Souls. How brilliant is that title? So glad that we all came up with that title. I'm like, yes, so glad.
Yeah.
But and particularly in wartime, so that sentence deals to the fact that every day is a challenge in some way. And when you're in the middle of a war or you're in the middle of peace, experiences can be calamitous. They really can be, depending on how you see them and what your response or reaction is to them. I mean, I was a lawyer for a long time. I saw a lot of people who got in trouble with the law because they were faced with an event or a confrontation or some circumstances, and they reacted to it in a way that made the calamity even deeper and broader and more impenetrable for them. And it cost them dearly, both in life and liberty and financial and everything else. So it's all about, everybody is challenged. But how do you deal with the challenges in life? And what I love about, when I create a series character, I don't just create a plot and I throw them into it and go forward. I try to think about, well, how is this character going to be interesting for multiple books? Because I've got a great plot I'm going to throw them into, but plot is not everything. There's no reader that can relate to a plot on a human level. They relate to your characters on a human level. So I like to sort of build baggage around my characters that I can then exploit and explore in future books, something in their background, something in their history, something in relations they had with people that is their own calamitous experience, and they're going to have to deal with book after book after book that follows them along. We all have those types of things. And that's how you connect with the human beings in books, because we all get knocked on our ass, some of us more often than others. So readers understand that. And then the next comes, well, how are you going to react to that? What's your response to are you going to stand up? Or are you just going to lay down in the fetal position? And that tells a lot about a character. And you're right. When people read books, they pull out things that they can experience differently because it's all seen through the prism of their own experience in life. So that's why every reader's impression of the book is so different. And people will relate to you whether you get back up and you try to go forward and do the right thing, you get back up and you defend yourself or you fight, or you lay there and you don't try to do anything and you wait for someone to come and solve the problem for you. Those are 3 very different kind of scenarios. But they also cover the spectrum of what people experience in life too. So that's what I was really trying to get through with that book. You don't have to be in a war to be faced with challenges that are really earth-shattering. It can come from lots of different things. You mentioned you have a child, a special needs child. I mean, that is an enormous challenge, and a lot of people have to face it and a lot of people don't have to face it, but it impacts your life, and how you respond to that situation speaks very deeply of who you are. And that's the connection you can make with real people and characters you create in a book. And I know the books that I've read in my life, I rarely remember the plots, but I do remember the characters. And that for me says everything I need to know about where you need to weigh your greatest writing ability. Plots are cool. I love creating plots. You create great plots too. But damn it, if the characters, if they don't care about the characters, by page 20, the reader's probably going to be like, just kill the son of a bitch. I don't get right about him. So that's why, you really need to have a balanced, thing on that. And every book that I've written, I've tried to do that.
Well, you've been extremely successful in doing that, particularly in this book right here. And I know I have to let you go because you have like 4 more books to write this year, and I don't want to hold you up. But selfishly, I want to talk to you for hours, but I know I got to let you go. Now, really quickly on language, I wanted to ask you about that because of that sentence, the calamitous burden of existence. I've heard you talk about the Gettysburg Address and the economy of words, and this is something that I want to get better at because my latest book I turned in at 141,000 words, and I think I could have been a little more economical with some of the language. I want to get better at that. My goal is to always have the next book be better than the current one, and the current one is the best that I can possibly make it at this given time. But I want to ask you about that, about the economy of words.
Yeah, it's if you can, it's easy to say something in 100 words, but at the same time dilutes the power if that same statement can be made in 10 words. It's just that you have not worked hard enough to distill it down into its pure essence of what you wanted to convey. And we all get to that point, but I've written 100,000 words. I just want to write the rest of it. I'm not going to think too deeply about where I need to go. I just want to get to there, and I can figure this out later. I kick the can down the road. But I've always found it's really hard if you don't do that distilling on that first pass through. Editing can remedy some of it, but not the core of it. You're not going to go in and cut 60,000 words out of a novel. It's not going to happen. So if you can go in from the very start and write economically and to make sure that every word has earned its right to be in that sentence or in that paragraph or on that page, then I think at the end of the day, you're going to have a lot less editing to do, and it's going to be a better story. Some books deserve to be meaty, but most books can be put on a diet and be even more powerful, because if you think about it, the more words that you use, you're just diluting the power of what you're trying to say. And if you find the exact right, Mark Twain's famous quote was, "The right word and almost the right word is a large difference. It's the difference between the lightning bug and the lightning." And I couldn't have said it any better. And if you think about it, he obviously distilled that down. He could have said that in 100 words, and he said it in just a handful of words, but it was very powerful. And I remember it. I will never forget that phrase, because it's just how significant every word has meaning and every word should be there. And without it, the entire point collapses. So for me, and in my screenwriting, when I wrote, I adapted one of my books. I had Ellen Burstyn, Academy Award-winning actress. We got hit by Hurricane Sandy, so we lost 2 days of filming. So we had a hole in the plot that I had to figure out on the fly while we were filming. So I'm sitting out in a farmyard in a rural area with roosters and chickens all over my butt, with my laptop in front of me. Ellen is in the room of this house that I can see her. She's in costume, and she will be acting out this dialogue as soon as I think of it. And I'm writing all this dialogue for Ellen, and then I was like, "What are you doing?" She's Ellen Burstyn, so you have this one line of dialogue that works. These other 9, you don't need them. I cut them all out. So I gave Ellen the one line of dialogue, and then guess what? Ellen does what Ellen does, and she just through an expression, she did the other 9 without me even having to write them. Now, you don't have, the privilege of having an actor who will be able to do that for you in a book. But it's sort of the same mindset of, what am I trying to say? And how efficiently, effectively, and most powerfully can I say it? And it's just too easy to say, I'll do a word dump and then I'll move on. That just isn't going to cut it. One, it's not going to cut it because the reader's going to be like, flip, 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 flip. But for you, just your own self-respect as a writer, you should want to do better. And I really do go back to the Gettysburg Address, 363 words long. It took him 2 minutes to speak it. The congressman from Pennsylvania who spoke before him spoke for 2.5 hours. Nobody remembers that guy. But every word of that speech, the greatest political speech in American history, had earned its right to be there. And the testament to Abraham Lincoln is that he thought of them all. But even more importantly, he thought of the ones to leave out.
Amazing. And I know I got to let you go because you have to write these books, and you have another one coming out in the fall. The Nash Falls is coming out in November. I know that. And then there's another one coming out, I think, in a few months later in the spring. So incredible. But I do want to ask you about the Wish You Well Foundation. What an incredible thing that you've done with that, and you've parlayed your success into other people's success by encouraging them to read, which is the foundation of all else. I wonder if you could tell me a little bit about the Wish You Well Foundation.
So when I first started out, a lot of the events that I was on were sponsored by libraries and Friends of the Library. So I got a crash course in literacy in this country and how, we are falling way below where we need to be. And if you think about it, reading really is fundamental because it'll tie, it's tied completely to the success you will have in life, socioeconomically, particularly in information age, where if you can't read at a high level, the job opportunities are severely narrowed for you. But also because reading just makes you a more complete, better person. If you think about it, just living your life personally, you can't experience the sum total of human experience. The rest of it has to be filled out by reading. and experiences. You can read in books, and you can meet people you're never going to meet in real life. You can go to places in books and you're never going to go in real life. You can go to places in books that you can't go in real life, like the past and the future, which allows you to in context. So 25 years ago, my wife and I started the Wish You All Foundation, and I call ourselves an ATM for the literacy world in the U.S. So we get grant requests from hundreds, if not thousands, of organizations every year across the state, across the country. We funded programs in, I think, all 50 states and counting, trying to get people to read at higher levels. And it's not, often now it's like, I want to need to at a higher level. In 2 years, I want to be from here to here. And I know if I get to this point, I can get this job that'll pay more money. My kids will have books in their home. Because if you're illiterate, your kids are going to be literacy challenged. That's proven beyond doubt. Plus, if you want to get rid of all the social ills, people complain about homelessness, hunger, crime, poverty. If you boost the reading levels in this country up to 90%, all of those social ills go away because they're all tied to that. 3/4 of the people incarcerated in state and federal prisons never graduated from high school. The connection is pretty stark. So we thought, what could we do best to serve this country? And the answer is pretty obvious. Get more people to read at a higher level. And it'll fix lots of problems we have. And guess what? It'll produce a lot nicer people as well.
Wow. Well, I love it. And I have thousands more questions here for you. I could talk to you for hours, but I sincerely appreciate you taking the time today. Thank you for your example, your inspiration, and everybody out there, Strangers in Time, so beautifully written, brilliant book. Get this added to the library, pre-order in Ash Falls. And if you haven't read from the beginning, then you have a lot of books to add to your library, 52 in fact, plus the short stories and the children's books. So thank you again for all you do, and sincerely appreciate it. And hopefully I'll see you in person one of these days soon.
Great. I enjoyed it very much. Thank you.
Take care.
This episode is brought to you by
Cry Havoc, from New York Times #1 bestselling author Jack Carr. Cry Havoc, a Tom Reese thriller. Order now.
Watch a Cry Havoc teaser here, or watch another episode of the podcast here.